Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. It's been quite the week in the United States, and we're very grateful for all of you attending this, the second seminar on global elections, which is hosted by H Advisors. My name is Tracey Cain. I'm the moderator for this webinar. I'm based in Australia, and it's 1 a.m. in Australia. And in fact, I worked on the president's staff during the election in 1996. So I have a deep interest in US politics. And I'm joined today by expert panelists. Firstly, my colleague, Liz Sidoti, the Managing Director and Head of Public Affairs at H Advisors Abernathy, in the thick of things in Washington, DC this week. And the Right Honourable Sir David Lidington, the Chair of the Royal United Services Institute, for those of you who don't know, the leading defence and security think tank in the UK. And he also served 27 years in the House of Commons, including as the spokesperson on Home Affairs, Environment, Treasury, and also Foreign Affairs. So I think we've got two very good experts to talk about where we are sitting at the moment in the US. Our topic for this webinar is what's at stake for companies in this year's elections around the world. And we invite all of the audience members to please put your questions in the chat section of Zoom. We want this to be a really interactive session, so we will take questions as we go. So please put them in as we go. So let's get started with some questions. The White House race, Liz. It's been decided, as has the Senate control, but the House control is still in play. Where are we at, and what does this latest mean in terms of the US policy agenda going forwards?
Thanks, Tracey, and thanks everyone for joining. So we're waking up to a very different Washington, and even more different than when we woke up yesterday, because the narrative all along has been that Republicans likely would not hold on to the House. But this significant Republican sweep of the White House, of the Senate, and with Trump at the top of the ticket, his ability to expand the Republican Party voting base, where he lifted his numbers and improved his numbers in just about every racial, gender, socioeconomic status, with just a wide range of voters, has put a lot of House races in play that weren't in play, and Republicans now stand on the precipice of possibly retaining control of the House as well, which would mean that we would usher in, after years of divided government, one-party rule in Washington if Republicans are in fact able to prevail in the House. The margin of victory, if they are able to prevail, will be pretty narrow. A handful of seats, but that would cement Republicans in more, put a finer point on it, Trump agenda policy approaches for the next 4 years, and really give him a bit of a glide path toward changing U.S. government in his likeness, which has significant ripple effects across the world for the global economy, as well as for multinational businesses and smaller businesses as well.
Yeah, of course. And what about the other side of the pond, David? From Europe's perspective, what is it looking like in terms of outcomes and impact?
I think the initial response from both the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and from other European leaders has been to respect the decision of the US voters, first of all, saying congratulations to Donald Trump. And we've had lots of statements from leaders saying we're looking forward to working constructively with him on our many shared interests. I think the first instinct, particularly in London, will be to try to make the sort of deep state relationships between London and Washington work. That did help a lot during the first Trump term. But those deep partnerships between intelligence agencies, militaries, diplomatic services, as well as the cultural and business and investment links that there are, and they're reproduced a different ways between other European countries and the US. Are important. They're not going to cease to be important. But that's coupled. That's on the surface is coupled with an anxiety about what the new Trump administration intends on two fronts. The first is economic, where the tariff policy and the fiscal policy of a second Trump term could have global impacts in terms of pushing up interest rates and bond rates, and in terms of depressing global GDP growth, if a tariff war were to ensue that choked off and restricted growth globally. But also on the security and defense front. I mean, most obviously with Ukraine, where I think there's intense concern in European capitals about whether the US will simply cease to supply arms and material to Ukraine, try to impose a peace on terms favorable to Putin. And then behind that, can the United States be relied on to remain committed to NATO, including to the Article 5 guarantee? And just that uncertainty, is causing jitters as a summit of European leaders taking place in Budapest as we speak. Now, frankly, my view is that European powers ought to have got their act together long before now, and something that Trump 1 did that was beneficial was to really send some hard messages to European leaders. Look, you've got to pay out more. You can't simply, look to the US taxpayer to pay for your defense and security. And that's a perfectly fair criticism, in my view. And most NATO member states are now at the 2% target figure, or have a plan to get to that. But I think we're going to need to do more than that. I mean, my argument to my government and to other governments in Europe would be that we have to be able to act, if necessary, without the United States in our own defense. The French Europe minister said the other day, we cannot have European security depending every 4 years on how voters in Wisconsin mark their ballot papers. So that looks then towards some sort of European pillar of NATO, some capability to act, if necessary, with the US, but at the same time trying to keep a close partnership with the US and to argue to Washington, look, it's still your interest in terms of American influence, American power, American prosperity to remain committed to NATO and to European defense and security.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is the second Trump term, as you say, but you talk about so much unknown. Trump 2.0, is it the same substance and style as the first era of Trump? And maybe Liz, you're well positioned to answer this, or are we expecting something different this time around?
So it's interesting. Look, from a style perspective, he would say that his approach works. Lots of chaos, lots of noise, lots of bluster, vague policy promises, or policy promises where he changes his mind on the whim. I think what's important to know here is that from a style perspective, I don't expect much to change. From a substance perspective, the reason this campaign worked, or one of the reasons, is because he did have a crop of political professionals around him. They essentially ran two different campaigns. They let Trump be Trump with his bluster and his noise and his derisive language. But they also executed a really professional campaign. I think you're going to see that in the White House too, that there's going to be Trump be Trump from a rhetorical perspective, but where the rubber meets the road, it's probably going to be a more professional operation than Trump 1.0. And so what does that mean for our partners around the world and for business? I think it's, on some levels, Trump does what he says. Now, there are degrees within that of how far is he really going to go. But I think we can expect fewer restrictions on businesses for sure. Some sort of tariff on U.S. imports that could trigger some trade wars, some efforts to renegotiate trade agreements across the board. I think you're going to see attempts to roll back climate promises and climate policy. You're going to see immigration crackdowns for sure. Again, to what degree, we don't know. And that has a direct impact on workforce issues. And I think generally you'll see a more friendly environment for corporate deals, for M&A. But again, to what degree? Because you do have JD Vance, who's been incredibly skeptical about consolidating, businesses consolidating and market competition. And in particular in the tech sector, he's very, very concerned about that. So Tracey, to put a finer point on it, Trump 2.0, I think will have a similar feel, but the machinations of how policy gets done and how the US engages with the world, I think will be more traditional than perhaps it was in the past. But again, we'll see based on who he surrounds himself with and who he actually brings into the White House and government. I mean, we've never seen a figure like Elon Musk, who has all kinds of interests and a whole host of stuff, richest man in the world, right? Be a part of decision-making at the top of the US government. We don't know for sure that he will be, but he's certainly going to be an informal advisor of some kind.
And there's talk of others as well joining, people like Elon Musk from industry joining the White House. That's a significant change in administration, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I think in the first go around, Trump has this thing about, he'll say, so-and-so's just right out of central casting, right? So he stopped his first administration with a lot of former generals, with a lot of military folks, with a lot of men. And this time around, it's clear that he is embracing more business-minded folks and starting, I mean, the names being floated in the last 48 hours, and even prior to that, are many strong, accomplished men. And I say that specifically, there's a handful of women being mentioned, but it's mostly men who come from the business sector. And I think that is a shift, and again, has signaled a more friendly environment for the business community. And I think the business community sees that. If you just look at the markets across the world in the last 24 hours and the market reaction, there is a strong feeling that Trump 2.0 and people he surrounds himself with will be good for business. And keep in mind, a lot of his donors came from the business world. And so there's some payback that will be going on as well.
What about again, from a Europe perspective, David, what are you certain about and excited about, and what are you uneasy about from that side of the world? We will delve into some policy areas in a sec, but more broadly.
I think you'd be hard put if you interrogated the leaders of the main European powers to find much sort of positive excitement there. I think people putting a brave face on this. I mean, you will get people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, who very much modelled their politics on that of Donald Trump, who will see this as a great victory, and they will seek to position themselves as the interlocutors for Europe with the White House. I don't think, certainly as far as Orban's concerned, that that's going to come to anything very much. But I think that there will be a hope that if the US economy grows, if America gets more prosperous, then there is a beneficial impact on the whole of the democratic world. That an America that is more prosperous, more self-confident, is an America that will be a better partner and ally for us, and also there will be economic opportunities there. The fears are going to be over a tariff war. I think you'll see the renewed commission president Ursula von der Leyen trying to get to Washington as soon as possible, and I think there'll be an initial offer to say, look, we want to work closely with you, but there are American products, that LNG, and so we can buy more of from you, and hope to stave off the imposition of tariffs by agreeing to buy more US stuff. If you get into the imposition of a universal tariff against imports to any other country, even an allied one, then I think certainly in Brussels you will get counter tariffs being imposed upon US products. And I think there's also some worries on the part of Europeans about how transactional Trump will be in terms of China. That does he line up to allies and say, if you want any favors from me, either on tariff exemptions or on security, then you come in line, you exclude much more Chinese investment, much more Chinese technology from your supply chains. And that, for a country like Germany, above all, that would cause some real problems and real economic damage. For the UK, where Keir Starmer is focusing on trying to get as much foreign and domestic investment into the country as possible, some of which will have to come from China. Again, there's a cost to compliance with such a demand from the White House. So there will be nervousness about these things. But I think above all, it'll be the defense and security issues that'll be troubling people. There is an actual war going on in Eastern Europe at the moment. And if Putin wins there, other countries, the Baltic states, Finland, Romania, see themselves as being next in line.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's do a little bit of we've got some questions coming through. Let's do a little bit of a round robin to tackle some really specific issues. First one, easier or harder to do business in America? Liz?
Oh, easier under the Trump administration, for sure. I think I talked a little bit about this, the rollback of restrictions. Now I say that easier for American companies to do business in the U.S., but given that we just talked about trade and tariffs and potential taxes in some sectors and with some foreign-owned companies, it may be more difficult depending on what Trump actually does.
Okay. All right, let's delve a bit more into trade, taxes, and tariffs. Either
well,
of you
I think
jump in?
I think that I think Trump has been very clear that he will use tools of tariffs and taxes to punish even allies to protect the American economy. Now, he has said a lot about the different things he would impose in those areas. Significant, 60% tariffs, I think, on Chinese goods, for example. That's a lot, and that has a direct impact and could have a direct impact on American consumers. So I think the calculation they have to make is the rhetoric that he said on the campaign trail to curry favor with working class voters. I used to say white working class voters, but I think what we've seen is that his working class message extended across races, ages, demographies. So with working class voters, he said a lot of things during the campaign. Now that he doesn't need their votes anymore, what does he actually do in practice? Because I do think he has a keen sense of the implications on the back end of those punishing trade measures.
And what about climate change, and particularly the sort of Paris Agreement? How do you see that going, David?
I think that, and if we believe what Trump says, we look at what he did in his first term, I would expect him to pull the US out of the Paris Agreement and the subsequent obligations. But I think the expectation, I think, this side of the Atlantic is that he's not going to demolish the whole of Joe Biden's policy on this, because a lot of the red states are the ones which are the chief beneficiaries of the protectionist measures that Biden took, which were based in part upon trying to encourage more EV production, more other sort of net zero technology in the investment into the United States rather than elsewhere in the world. So I can't see Trump wanting to get rid of that. Where I see a potential battle looming is over carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which the European Union and the UK are planning to introduce to provide a level playing field for competition, so that imports into our jurisdictions from countries that don't apply similarly rigorous environmental and net zero rules to their manufacturing processes are subject to, in effect, a surcharge so that our own companies are not at a disadvantage by having to comply with our tougher regulations. Now, I can see if Trump plans to deregulate more in the United States, and the Europeans then say, right, well, that means you're going to be paying tax on, that's not tariff, that's just carbon border adjustment, dealing with the net zero costs. Then I can see a quite a difficult battle looming over that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think on the climate piece of it, if he does make good on what he says he wants to do, which is roll back all of the subsidies and investments in green energy through the Inflation Reduction Act, that will take an act of Congress. There's only so much that he can do on his own through executive orders to do that. So that's an example of where if Republicans do retain control of the House and it's one-party government, he could make, despite the political implications in red states, he could make a real significant move to repeal that, regardless of who that hurts. He did make that pledge. The CHIPS Act is another similar issue that he has pledged to roll back, which is, subsidies and investments for semiconductor chip production in the U.S. Right now, obviously, that a lot of that innovation is out of China, but the CHIPS Act was passed in order to stand up and support that industry in the U.S. Trump has pledged to roll that back, and he can only do that if he has a united front in Congress. So again, I think what we see in the next, who knows, right, hours, days, weeks, in terms of control in the House, will really dictate how far he will go. He will try to go as far as he can. Complete control of Congress by Republicans would give him the ability to consolidate power in a way that will allow him to go forward on whatever policies he wants in an unfettered way.
I mean, into Liz just said, because I think that if the Trump administration were successfully to move to remove subsidies and incentives for investment and development of zero carbon technology in the United States, the global consequence would be global customers buying more Chinese stuff, more Chinese technology, because the Chinese are looking at this in terms of 50, 100 years, and very, very clear ambition to have the dominant position in the supply of this technology and others.
And I think that's the question, right? Because this is his second term. It's also a legacy term for him, right? And so, he has proven himself to be great at sort of the short-term political read, and in some cases, the long-term consequences of short-term decision-making. Look at our Supreme Court, which he remade, by making decisions in the short term that have had lasting impact and will continue to have lasting impact for generations. So David, I think your point is very salient, because that's what I think the professional class around him that he will surround himself with, those are the calculations they're going to be making. Is okay, we can do this, but here are the short-term implications. It might feel good right now, but the long-term could be disastrous and actually be counterproductive to what you want to do. Those are the conversations. I mean, Tracey, you know this, having worked, in the presidential team in '96. Those are the calculations, particularly in transition period between now and when the new government takes place, that they're going to have to really think through. And a big significant part of that is, who do you surround yourself with? Who's his cabinet going to be? And what kind of signals do the personnel decisions he's making in this interim period, what kind of signals do they send about how far he's willing to go on policy? And, do those individuals take a short-term view of the impact of policy changes, or a very long-term legacy building view?
So let's move to a different sector for a moment, the fintech sector. So we've had quite a few questions coming in around what shift do you expect in this space, and what would you be thinking if you were part of that industry, whether it's in the US or whether it's in the UK?
David, you should take that.
I mean, I think it's probably for Liz to talk more about the US. Although my expectation would be that Trump would want to encourage more fintech investment and development within the United States. I think as far as Britain is concerned, the opportunities for fintech are going to remain very, very good. If I look at what the Starmer government is seeking to do, I mean, it's got some pretty tight fiscal and monetary policy constraints limiting its freedom of action, and it can't simply go on a borrowing splurge because the markets will punish it. But they know that they're somehow going to have to bring the the cost of operating public services down without compromising quality. And they're already saying publicly that things like health care, the administration of pensions and benefits, that they're going to be looking to fintech and to the whole new technology sector to provide many of the answers to that. And so I think that there will be an appetite in the UK, and I think in the more free market minded countries, or particularly Northern Europe, going on over the next decade and longer. So I'd expect Scandinavia, Netherlands, if as looks likely, it's a CDU-led coalition in Germany as the next government, then I think that, particularly with Merz at the helm, I think that the Germans would move more in a free market direction as well. My caveat to that would be with regard to Germany and some of the other continental European countries, one shouldn't underestimate the debate about data sharing, data transfer, rights of privacy, and the sort of suspicion of digital technology that goes along with that. I mean, it's particularly in countries that experienced Soviet occupation and had the secret police keeping records of individuals and families. There is still a great apprehension about allowing public authorities, governments, to get their hands on lots of personal data.
And that really does take us into the sort of questions that we're starting to receive about market concentration and about monopolies in the US. Talk to us, Liz, maybe unpack a bit of what you see, how you see that action by the next Trump government might take hold.
Yes, I think, well, let's talk about the last 4 years, right? Lina Khan was put in charge of essentially overseeing market competition and antitrust issues, and brought case against, challenged, I should say, a lot of different potential mergers, and put a stake in the ground, particularly in the tech sector, that tech has become too big and needs to be broken up. What's been fascinating to me about the last 4 years is I feel like on the political continuum here, from liberal to conservative, when it comes to issue of market consolidation and particularly scrutiny over big deals, you're seeing that continuum kind of bend, and you're seeing the far left sound very similar to the far right. In particular, J.D. Vance has our next vice president has sounded a lot like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on some of these issues by saying, I worry about big tech's getting too big. It has too much control over our lives, and advocating for more competition in the tech sector. Lina Khan has spent the last several months in a very public campaign to try to keep her job. I don't anticipate she will be keeping her job. I think what you will see is in Trump's appointments to the SEC, to parts of the DOJ, that they will continue to focus on scrutinizing big mergers and acquisitions, but not with the zealousness. And I think they will pick and choose their areas to challenge in a way that didn't feel like the SEC under President Biden did. I think so it will be easier to get deals done for sure, and you're seeing that the markets kind of are showing that already, that they anticipate that deals in America will be easier to get done. But I do think there will continue to be bipartisan scrutiny and action on the part of the Trump administration when it comes to tech. Again, it's a question of degrees. To what degrees? Will the Trump administration continue to try to break up and punish big global multinational tech companies, or will they take kind of a more behind the scenes approach to encourage more competition? It remains to be seen.
One last area to touch on, wars in the Ukraine and the Middle East, and the impact of those on fuel prices, supply chains, etc. How do you see that unfolding with the information we have currently?
Yeah, I think David talked a little bit about this.
Yeah.
You know, Trump has been very, very clear that he wants, and he has pledged, it hasn't even been, it's not just clarity, he's pledged to end the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East before he's inaugurated. Time's ticking. I mean, that's not, I mean, these are years-long efforts to end these wars, and he has said that he's going to try to end them by January 20th. We'll see if how far he can go towards that. In both cases, it's not just fuel prices. I mean, America has become in the last several years the number one producer of oil and gas in the world. And that has helped the US in its calculation on how to engage without affecting fuel prices. On the other hand, Trump has been very clear that he is no fan of Ukraine for many different reasons. We know that he had conversations with Putin over the last several years while he's been out of office. So I think any efforts to end the Ukraine war on the part of Trump could favor Putin. On the other hand, if you look down the Middle East, he and Netanyahu have had a tortured relationship, I would say, over the last several years. But his support for Israel is unwavering. And so it's going to be fascinating, I think, to watch this interim period to see how much he can get done, really, and who comes out on top and who comes out not on top in those negotiations. The implications for business are enormous. It's not just that business operates in each of those regions, but the wars are affecting energy prices around the world, as well as supply chain issues. And there's ancillary effects to those wars on businesses that may not make front page news, but in each case, maybe that businesses have employees in certain regions who need to be protected and supported. So the implications, I think, are significant. And yet again, we're in a situation where, I do think he will make good on what he says. To what degree and in what time period remains to be seen.
I think you just took the two in sequence. I think I look at the two conflicts very differently from one from another here. I think in Ukraine, I think that I don't believe Putin is remotely interested in a peace settlement. Putin is interested in the capitulation of Ukraine, and he believes that Ukraine is not a real country, that the Ukrainian people are Russians really who have a false consciousness and think that they're different somehow. So I think that trying to force Zelensky or a successor to capitulate on the terms that Russia would accept, which would be Ukrainian neutrality, if not subservience, and the annexation of Russia's the territory Russia is currently occupying or part occupying, would be seen globally as yet another defeat for America and for the West, following unsuccessful wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, following a disorderly retreat from Kabul. And this would feed directly into President Xi's narrative that it is China that is the rising power in the 21st century, and the United States is a dominant power that is now in decline, and the rest of the world should adjust accordingly. So I think that the political risk for President Trump would be that actually he gives succor to what he sees as America's strategic opponent by giving way to a country, Russia, with which China is allied, and that is increasingly now the junior partner to China on the global stage. I think in terms of business, I think, frankly, business has made its adjustments with in respect of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I can't see any Western company that is sensible wanting to expose itself to greater risk of investment in Russia, because the Russian government has shown itself willing to behave in an arbitrary and capricious fashion, leaving aside the question that I doubt that other European countries would lift sanctions against Russia in the event of an attempt to force Ukraine to an unfair and what would likely only be temporary settlement. With the Middle East, my big fear is of the current conflict widening out to include a sort of direct Israeli-Iranian war.
Yeah.
Because if you try to think yourself into the position of people in Iran, I think they must be pretty frightened at the moment. Their allies in Hezbollah and Hamas have been hugely weakened and their capabilities degraded. The very fact Iran has not responded, as forcefully as it could do to the Israeli sort of counterattacks on Iranian territory, I think has made Iran look weak globally. So and the regime itself has had a lot of domestic discontent in the last couple of years. So if you're sitting in Tehran, you look at North Korea enviously, say, well, they managed to get a nuclear weapon, and nobody talks about attacking Kim Jong-un now. Should we try to do the same? If we could do that successfully, then we'll be guaranteed against the risk of attack. We might even get a summit meeting with the US president. And so they, I think, are going to be more tempted to see if they can get ever nearer to that breakout point. The Israelis, for all the obvious reasons, say they cannot possibly tolerate that happening. And indeed, were that to happen, the risks of proliferation throughout the Middle East, Saudi, Emiratis, Egypt, Turkey, would be increased massively. But if you get into a military conflict directly between Iran and Israel, then the risks to the Straits of Hormuz, I think, become very real. And just uncertainty and conflict would result in an increase in shipping insurance rates and in spot oil and gas prices anyway, whether the straits were blocked or not. And if you look at the UK, we still get a large amount of our gas from Qatar, from a field that the Qataris share with the Iranians. It's divided between the territorial waters of the two nations. A lot of the world still relies on oil from the Gulf. China, it gets something like 10% of its oil imports from Iran. A lot of countries around the world rely on the Saudis and the Kuwaitis for their oil. So I think there are some real risks there.
So significant destabilizing factors. I mean, what was it, about a year ago when Houthi rebels took over the Suez Canal and the shipping, goods and services making their way to the US took much longer, which meant increased prices and the pressure that companies felt to navigate that issue. I think David, you're right. The ripple effects of a widening war in the Middle East are just very significant. And the question in my mind continues to be, how much power does the U.S. really have to broker negotiations? And even some of the people with the longest standing relationships in that world are no longer going to be in the White House and the administration. So pay close attention to who Trump surrounds himself with and who he tasks with going overseas. I'll tell you, the one person probably won't be in, they've made very clear they're not coming back in, is the person he tasked with Middle East peace in the last go round, which was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, right? Jared and Ivanka have been very clear they're not coming back to government. And so you start to say, okay, who are the people he surrounds himself with, and what kind of power does the U.S. really have to influence Israeli policy at this point?
It was striking, wasn't it, Liz, that on the platform family party, the Kushners were right at the end of the line. They weren't in the center any longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions around the post-election circuit in Washington have been, okay, I mean, are they going to come back or aren't they? I mean, now that he's won, does he bring them back into the fold? And it's been very, very clear that is not in the cards. I think it was a very tough 4 years for them.
Yeah.
We are inundated with questions,
Oh,
so I'm
wonderful.
going to sort of fire them at you for some quick responses. The first one is there is an interim period between now and when the new government takes effect in January. What is the advice for those who are in America or looking to trade with America? What can be done in that time period?
Oh, there's so much that can be done. So if you're a client or you're a company, um, you really need to take a look at the new reality that we're waking up to. And I would say today, prepare for a one-party rule and look at your business plan, look at your business priorities, and map where do you want to try to influence policy and where do you want to lead in your sector, where do you want to be part of the pack in your sector, and where do you want to follow in the sector, and start to, if you haven't already done that scenario planning, start to really adjust. And you can get clues about, again, how far the Trump administration is going to go based on the personnel decisions that are made in this period. That is the single biggest clue that you will get on how far. I mean, here's an example. Trump on the campaign trail said Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's been a vaccine skeptic and a health skeptic, will be tasked with remaking large swaths of the health industry, the government, like that HHS, Health and Human Services Department, and other parts of the health apparatus of the U.S. government. He then went out and said fluoride in water, which is a huge public health issue that has been settled for decades. He would get rid of fluoride in water, public water. That spurned a huge backlash, and they've already started to back off that, right? So does Robert F. Kennedy Jr. actually get a place in a Trump administration or not? If you are in the healthcare industry, you need to pay attention to that and start to adjust and figure out how, views from like-minded folks that Trump is surrounding himself with, how does that actually affect you as a company? The final thing I'll say is, how do you make it through this transition period? Focus on your business plan, focus on where you want to play and what policies matter to your business plan, your ability to do business, and try as much as you can to block out the noise. Here's what we know. There will be a lot of noise between now and January 20th and for the next four years and 3 months. You need to focus on you and in your own company, your own company's needs.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is to keep an eye as well on any talk about who is going to emerge as the committee chairs and the chamber leadership in Senate and if the House goes Republican in the House as well.
Okay. All right. Next question from those watching. What can we expect in Trump's first 100 days?
He's been very clear about what he's going to do. The question is he actually going to do it, right? Like, I think that to some degree he will make good on his pledge to go after his political enemies, to rid the American government of people he thinks are not loyal. I do think that will happen, but I think from a policy perspective, in the first 100 days, there's always a snapback. If a new government takes office, there's always an attempt to roll back as many of the regulations that the previous administration put in place through executive orders immediately. And, Trump did that 8 years ago when he took office. Biden did that 4 years ago when he took office, to try to undo as much policy as the previous administration did. That's going to happen. I think it'll happen in every sector. I think he will, despite America being number one in oil and gas production, I think he will take steps to further roll back regulations in that sector immediately. I think from the immigration, expect a significant series of executive orders on immigration. He's been clear of, mass deportations of illegal immigrants. He's been clear about family separation policies. One of his advisors reiterated just in the last 12 hours that he intends to build detention camps. And look, we saw it with the wall. He did build the wall. It wasn't completely finished, but he did do it. So expect significant moves on administration. I think we already talked about, rolling back subsidies for green energy and the Inflation Reduction Act. I think he'll try to tackle some of those climate, certainly on trade, and tariffs, taxes. He will do that. There will be an attempt, I think, in the first 100 days to try to renew and lock in tax cuts that he passed that are for the highest earners, as well as a lower tax rate for corporations. Those are all things that I think he'll move forward in the first 100 days to try to go as far as he can through executive orders.
And what are the things that
he'll also
really
try and
won't
do? It will give effect to what he's pledged to bring the Ukraine war to an end.
Yes, of course.
But the big question is, what, if anything, is he going to demand from Putin in return for doing that? And he will have every European democratic leader lining up to him to say, don't just give way. So I think that once we know who the Secretary of State is going to be, then that helps to guess what approach will be taken.
Yeah, the one thing we didn't talk about is between now, what's Biden going to do between now and January 20th?
Yeah.
And the president is trying hard to lock in billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine before January 20th, to make good on promises that he made to Zelensky. And so that's just one step, but he's also going to take a series of steps. We're going to hear from him in the next hour for the first time, where he's planning to make remarks in the Rose Garden of the White House to talk about a peaceful transfer of power. Pay close attention to the subjects that he raises in those remarks for the efforts that he will likely take in the next 90 days to lock in his policies and prevent them from being rolled back. So I think there's two tracks here we need to watch. What is Trump going to do, and what is Biden going to do?
Another question that's come through is for you, David. The Foreign Secretary's prior comments on Trump and the purported interference in the election by the Labor Party, will that have a tangible impact on the US-UK relationship for businesses?
No. Straight answer. If he wants to pray, if he has a more substantial reason for get a dispute with the UK, then he can always pray those old remarks in aid. But I think that David Lammy's comments were probably not as hardline as those that J.D. Vance made a few years ago, and all seems to have been forgiven as between Vance and Trump. Lammy was with Keir Starmer when they had dinner with Trump a few weeks ago at Mar-a-Lago, and it all seems to have gone reasonably well there. So I just don't think that this is not a sufficient cause for there to be some great breakdown. They're never going to be bosom buddies, but Trump is transactional, and if he sees advantage, the British government is there, and if he sees advantage in doing deals with the British government or the government of any other country, he will do that. And I don't think he'll let a few remarks made quite a few years ago now stand in his way.
One of the follow-up questions here actually relates to what you've said there, that could you comment on what it feels like to be in the UK government when Mr. Trump fires off one of his tweets criticising the UK policy or a politician?
That's a great question.
I think the disconcerting thing was in Trump one was the sheer unpredictability of the president. That you knew, and the British government would use the leverage we had through all the relationships. Our senior military to the Joint Chiefs, Ministry of Defence in London to Pentagon, Foreign Office in London to State, National Security Advisor to National Security Advisor, Treasury at the top level with US Treasury, bank to bank And so we knew what the top people of those parts of the US system were thinking and saying, and what advice they were giving to the president, and
Mhm.
whether the advice was divided or whether it was unified. But sometimes we knew that uh, all the agencies, all the departments were saying one thing to President Trump during his first term, but American officials said to us privately, look, we know what the advice is that's gone in to the boss, but we won't know what US policy is till we switch on Twitter at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Yeah, yeah. We don't know what's going to come out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A couple of questions for you, Les, really focused on the campaign and the fallout from the campaign. The first, I'm going to combine two together. One is the sort of the blaming by the Democrats on Obama and Biden for Harris's failure, and equally the period of wilderness that the
Mhm.
Democrats are going through. How low is that going to go, and how long do you think that will go for?
Oh, I think the Democrats who don't take this as a larger issue, this goes, the reckoning that Democrats are facing goes beyond any single player. It's not an Obama issue. It's not a Harris issue. It's not a Biden issue. It is a Democratic Party issue. The Democratic Party for the last decade plus has made a decision, and that decision was to push progressive social justice policies.
Mm.
And that had real impact. What Trump was able to do was consolidate an incredible coalition. And I talked about this a little earlier, and improve his numbers with demographics that you would not ever dream would support Trump. And he did it in one way, and it's the one way that Democrats have failed to focus on, I'd say, in the 10 plus years, which is to appeal to the socioeconomic struggles of everyday Americans who aren't on the coasts and who aren't in big cities. People across the country, and we know this as communicators, people care most about the things that personally affect them, and the need to cater your message to the individual and how they're feeling is almost always a winning strategy. Also, the economy in the US is almost a winning strategy. And the Biden administration's efforts to lower inflation and to make sure we have a robust economy, the economic indicators look great, look strong, I should say. The fundamentals of our economy remain strong, but real America isn't feeling that. And Democrats, in my view, haven't had permission to talk about the issues that they have been talking about: abortion, transgendered rights, climate change, and what have you. Most of America, as proven, doesn't want to hear that and hear about those issues if they're struggling to put food on the table, if they're paying for bread that's twice the amount of money they did, 4 years ago. And so I think what you're seeing is that the country, more than half of the country speaking out and saying to Democrats, you used to be the party of working class people like me, but it's a luxury to be able to talk about the issues that you're talking about, and you failed to talk about issues that really resonate with me on a day-to-day level. And those are economic issues. They feel left behind. And Trump was able to consolidate that. So that and tap into that across the board. So Tracey, the point is, there's going to be lots of blame shifting. The blame shifting is going to go around. The finger pointing is going to go around. But this is a larger issue than any one individual in the Democratic Party. This is the Democratic Party having lost working class voters who used to be their base. They have a lot of soul searching to do here to get back on top. And my own view, coming from the great state of Ohio, that I think has started the shift. It's no longer a battleground state. Started the shift 8 years ago. Is that this is not a 4-year issue for Democrats. This is, Republicans have tapped into this through Trump, and we've already seen have figured out a way to continue to expand their power by tapping into the sentiment. So I think, for Democrats, it's going to be a very long time until they figure out how to recover.
So if we take a broader perspective, this year there's been a lot of elections around the world, a lot of change. How does the outcome of the US election compare with some of those other elections? How does it add or subtract to a broader trend around the globe?
So
I think
David, go ahead.
you go first.
Okay, I'll start and then you close.
Yeah.
So here's what we've seen around the world. Anxiety, then voters have expressed it, anxiety and dissatisfaction. And that has translated into, in many places, throwing out the existing government. The US put a finer point on that. And I think illustrated what we're seeing in lots of different places. Upheaval and a dissatisfaction with existing government leaders and structures and policies being put forward. I do think that part of that is a hangover from pandemic years and the post-pandemic policies that existing governments put in place, and the chickens are coming home to roost, I think. David?
I think the general message is that incumbents struggle, and that it is the economy above all other issues that has dominated how people have voted in those elections. Although in the sort of northern democratic world, large-scale movement of people and sort of both illegal migration and legal migration, depending on which country you look at, have been salient issues. But in economic insecurity has lain behind a lot of the worries about movement of people. Yeah. And what we've had is a combination of trends. We have had economies still struggling now to recover from the trauma of 2008-9 and the meltdown that we saw then. We have got global competition. We have got the impact of digital technology, which is still transforming the world of work. The transformation of white collar and professional work has barely started yet. That is going to go a lot further. So all that is going on. Then we had, if it weren't bad enough, we had 2 years pretty much lost to COVID and huge amounts of borrowing having to take place to just tide everybody through COVID. Then we had the disruption in energy markets and for a period, international foodstuff markets occasioned by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And then, particular countries, there were other issues, Brexit, the obvious one for the UK, but it's that economic turbulence leading to uncertainty on the part of ordinary families, whether we can put food on the table next week, but also, will my children have a decent chance? You've now got generations growing up, the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, elsewhere, where young people are just assuming that they will not be able to match, let alone surpass, their parents' standard of living. And that is really bad. The people then say, well, this system, that we've got doesn't seem to be working for me and my family.
Agreed.
And I think that's a really nice end point, because we are unfortunately out of time. And an hour, you said it at the beginning, Liz, an hour is never enough to properly get into the detail. I would remind those who are watching, though, that H Advisors is around in 20 countries. We can have individual conversations around individual client needs. Liz, David, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, your insights, your advice, and thank you to our audience as well. We hope you're able to join us for the next H Advisors webinar as we close out a really interesting election year. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.